Okay. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. In tonight's episode, I would like to speak about theology and the creative mind. And I want to talk about pre- and post-religious expressionism. You know, in the future I will definitely give a very legitimate episode and talk on just the value of religion so far in history. But I thought in this episode I'd brainstorm a bit and try to see that the past and the future of the religious archetype, where it will lead or what will happen to it. Saying that religion is not just an ideological system, it's an experiential system, in the sense that the only reason, because it related directly to people's experiences. You know, sometimes I wonder why an ideological system from the 6th century is a part of people's lives, you know, in 2021. And I eventually noticed that religion is tackling the question of, are we alone in the universe? And really, loneliness is at the core of the human psychology. There's so many ways we can look at life and wonder about the progression of life. That means not only just like what life is, how it has been so far. You know, I have seen various kinds of religious people on this planet. Personally, I was raised in Iran in my youth, and Iran is a theocratical society. I saw the Shia denomination of Islam. And, you know, from Iran, I came to Canada, and in some sense, I was pushed into a sort of, I would say, Christian ethos. You know, little did I know that a lot of the superhero characters, when I was very young and I was watching cartoons, that all follows a sort of Christian theme. You know, now if I was to talk about religion, first I got to acknowledge that it's impossible. It's impossible based on multiple reasons from a theological angle. One reason is that first of all, it's so far in the past, who knows what exactly happened. So that's one I would say angle of perception. The other angle of perception is that even if man could comment, let's say for a second we engage that religions, they all have revelation, and revelation means talking truth. That means the truth communicated to man, or in the religious context, the creator created man. And so most religious, I would say this is not just in videos of different religions if you were to watch it, but most religious ideology is encouraging the religious person to have a connection with their creator. That means for a religious person, I feel this is for the monotheistic religions, this is a bit universal, that fear of God is the start of wisdom. So if you were a person in a world where everything's movement was God's will, the fear of God, in some sense you begin becoming wise in accordance to the religious context. That means, you know, someone who fears God by other religious people is seen as a religious person. You know, that means as if the archetype exists and then around. Now, we can also say in the 6th century, the evolution of human psychology was post-language. So you can see how human beings were talking. Human beings could read and write. And in some sense, language had been established as a sort of cultural truth, and then religion was a sort of response to that cultural truth. That means sometimes when I think about human psychology and I wonder when I look at religious psychology, like I wonder about, in some sense, without language, what that means. The secret of all belief systems is how language is being experienced, really. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that in the 6th century, an ideological system developed. This ideological system was a response to its culture before. When I say religious, I'm actually focusing on the monotheistic religions. You can say Buddhism is a religion. You can say, Hinduism has its religious categories. The monotheistic aim came from a response in people considering truth to be objects. That means it was as if, imagine somebody was, imagine very early, we go before religion, we go to a point of pantheism. And this concept of the creator-creation is dualistic. That means even if we went further back than pantheism, if we went further back than pantheism, you would go in some sense to religious ideologies of, that means many people don't know this, but Zoroastrianism had a huge influence on the philosophy of duality. That means it was as if not only was there a sort of on and off switch effect happening in civilization, in the sense of the sun hitting the earth and not hitting the earth, and hitting the earth and not hitting the earth, that kind of led to a dualistic psychology. But the moment we animated the dualistic psychology in our realm, in its most earlier forms, it was the god of light and it was the god of darkness. And Zoroastrianism, one of these ancient religions, I would say, or pre the monotheistic religions, it had this major duality. That means one thing I could say all religions, all ideological systems have in common is that there is an individual and world dynamic. That means we're wondering about the relationship of the individual with the world, and then we're wondering about the relationship of the world with the individual, then we're wondering about the intelligent and non-intelligence of both of them. That means what's an intelligent way the human being is engaging the world? What is a non-intelligent way the human being is engaging the world? What is an intelligent way the world is engaging human beings? What is a non-intelligent way the world is engaging human beings, right? Because we all, at least most people currently alive, they consider, human beings consider themselves as intelligent. Right now, there's a certain level of intelligence that is allowing me to even share this podcast. So intelligence is really observed in the self. And of course, whoever's listening, keep in mind, currently there's 0 viewers. So for all the 0 viewers that are listening, of course, I'm just sharing my perspective as one human being who has experienced these ideas. But anyways. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that human psychology started from a non-language based realism. People actually felt objects were truth. That means imagine somebody saw a tree and that person's like, no way, man, this tree is like my God right now. So they had that sort of approach, right? And then the monotheistic religions, they were sort of response to the the polytheistic tradition. For example, there's the story of Abraham, hence why we say the Abrahamic religions. Abraham, for example, at least of course in Judaism, in Christianity, There's different modes, there's different ways where these common characters are introduced. But pretty much Abraham, there's a story, at least I know this from the Islamic conception. Abraham, Muslims all around the world, regardless of their denominations, they all pray towards the Mecca, the Kaaba. And the Kaaba is, I can tell you that the Kaaba is an empty square building that used to be where people would put their idols that they would worship. Idols made of wood, feathers, stone, And so there's this story that evidently Abraham, tells people stop worshiping, these objects, and people are like, no, Abraham, none of your business, And so they come back to see Abraham is standing beside one of the statues, and beside one of the statues there's a hammer leaning to the statue. And so they see all the gods are destroyed except one of them, and they go pretty much like, Abraham, did you do this? And Abraham's like, no, this God did it. And they say, this God doesn't have hands, it couldn't have done it, And so Abraham says, if your God can't even, if it can't even do anything, how could it be a God? You see, it's human beings that have this urge in them, in our psychology, to fulfill. That means if somebody sees an empty, let's say a 2/3 full cup of tea, and they have a kettle in their hand, most likely they fill up the tea. That means we're creatures that project meaning, and then we fulfill it through our actions. So anyways, truth we went from object worship, we went into subject worship. You can say the act of worshiping is pretty much having your attention on somebody playing video games all the time, they're worshiping video games. You can say that. You can say somebody, just looking at like there's some people on the planet who their attention is on how a system ends. There's some people who their attention is on how a system starts. And there are those who's maintained. Religion, I would say it's power, or I would say it's literary power, is in the mere fact that if we took these three dimensions, our scientific ability as a species, it in some sense gives us an explanation of the origin of the universe. That means through a person in a secular society, you look at your world and you're like, all right, there was a bang, there was a big bang. Right, that's very crucial for secular society, because the theory of the Big Bang is like filling the gap of how the universe began. So you would see, through the secular mind, you'd be like, okay, in some sense, through the scientific method, we have managed to figure out how the universe, began, a theory on it. An approach of, of course, nobody was alive billions of years ago to know 100%, but we're like, that's why everything is a theory, because we can't time travel. At least anything on the past, is to some degree a theory. When it comes to the present, this is where I would say the scientific method shines, because the scientific method is actually engagement. Every living being is engaging their world, and how they're engaged their world leads them into a certain attitude towards themselves, where the person can say he's religious or whatever idea, Like right now, there's the atheist idea, there's the theist idea. There's probably going to be a theist atheist and an atheist theist in the future. It's going to be 4 categories. Religion responds to the final phase, where that means the past and the present. Science, the scientific method helps us. But when it comes to the concept of how systems end, death, right? This is why religion is really the concept has stuck around, right? Mainly because human beings are afraid. Because we're afraid, we want to hold on to something. Imagine right now, wherever you are, the ground that was underneath you for a second just, became invisible. You'd hold on to whatever you could see, right? So it would be as if something where the person is holding on to what is known, but inevitably the way the system of life is designed is that we're moving towards the unknown. And because religion shares an imagery of a solution to the unknown, that means, here's the thing, it's as if human beings are afraid of emptiness. Because they're afraid of emptiness, they're each telling themselves a level of a story. This doesn't mean there is no such thing as divinity. This doesn't mean there is no such thing as higher dimensions. I'm just saying, when it comes to human psychology, right, we just like we clothe our bodies, just like how we clothe our bodies, we in some sense clothe our minds in stories or identities, or archetypes of a religious nature, scientific nature, philosophical nature, mystical nature. And imagine, I should have probably said this at the beginning, but imagine you're a creative person now. And you suddenly wonder what was creativity in the 6th century, and you would realize pretty much ideas have been behaving like collective beings. That means it's hilarious. Ideas possess people, and they can possess masses of people, And that's why I'm saying it's like we went from object worship to subject worship, and now we're coming to a point where we're like, okay, it doesn't matter if the object comes first, then the subject, or the subject comes first, then the object. A religious person is a person who their faith is in the subject of reality first, then its objectivity. A secular person is where their faith is in objectivity, then subjectivity. Both have an advantages, but the secular mentality is efficient in the outer realms. What that means is, in the inner realms, a person can be anything. Literally a person can be like, from now on, I'm going to worship the invisible. I'm going to worship invisibility. I'm going to be my philosophy is just going to be everything. Truth is invisible. Like a person can do that. A person in there's a personal space in our psyche, and there's an impersonal space. The personal space has to be realized to be a circle inside the greater circle of the world. That means, I'm telling you, like right now, I'm in a moment where pretty much my intelligence is alone, and so I'm moving it, right? I'm piloting my attention. But there has been times where I have been in nature, beyond language, beyond religion, beyond any idea I have known, and I have just been part of my moment of being. And I can tell you, there's a divinity to that it's like no story can touch. That means right now I'm talking about ideology, but I'm that person who's saying truth can never be an idea. Truth cannot be held in language. As if language was the hands of our mind, these hands, these stories cannot contain this dynamic, universal event. Now, if there's a chance it's multidimensional, pretty much that means all the dimensions of order and chaos become multidimensional too. That means if in a multidimensional reality, if you're a person who's still has a psychology of good guy, bad guy mentality, I'm telling you, in a multidimensional world, you will just see the nature of what you input, right? So it's like the mind is like this computer that's updating all the time. Imagine. right? And on this computer, on the keyboard, based on our decisions in life, based on our communication, our behavior, our expressionism, right, we're inputting stuff into the keyboard, right? And it's such a unique dilemma when you wonder about the psychology of the human being, because we can't say we're just the world because we're acting differently than any other species on this planet. Like, it's so hard to just say we're an animal. You know, we're an animal. If we are an animal, we're an animal that is noticed. It is an animal which renders it beyond an animal. That means the individual consciousness we find that we can access in our communication on Earth is a ridiculous advantage. In the chat section, Dan says death is an idea. Yes, the inner realm concept of death is an idea, but in the outer realms there is death. Like, you know, a person can be like, I'm eternal, then they're, you know, like their hand, you know, then they trip, you know, then they realize really how quickly the outer realms is as valid as the inner realms as long as you're in it. Right now I'm a biological being, rather than trying to see myself as some abstract creature. I tend to be like, all right, the simple dimensions of existence that are automatically there, they are there. They're the first given wave of information, right? So it's as if like the reason I'm saying I'm a biological entity and how everybody else on the planet is saying also is because we notice the biological existence. We have access to its mobility and not 100% access, which is the crazy problem of the hard problem of consciousness. Why are we conscious of certain things that we can use our free will to move and adjust, and why aren't we conscious of the other, right? And the thing about religion is that the moment the world is the whole world's responsibility, the individual doesn't have fear. I can testify for this. You know, when I was really young, I was afraid of the dark, you know. And I went to my mother, I think I was like, I don't know, I was like 7, 8. And I remember my mother, my mother's side, there's a, you know, they were more religious. My father was more of a spiritual mentality. But I remember I asked my mother, this was in Iran when I was a little kid, and I asked my mother, I'm like, what do I do? I'm afraid of the dark. I remember I'd seen an alien movie, and and my mother said, just say God's name, you know. And I'm this little kid, you know, imagine every time, she said say God's name 7 times. And so every night I would go to sleep, it had just become a habit for me to 7 times just call truth's name, you know. And, you know, after I would call it, you know what it was? It was like the 7th time I would say the prayer was like the moment where my inner realms, like, were convinced of their own expressionism. Do you know what I mean? That means when I remember my little kid psychology being, like, just like imagine just like a 7-year-old version of me saying, you know, 7 times, you know, a prayer, and then just all the fear and all that stuff going away, and just being very, like, it was a source of contentment. I will tell you, like, you can say there was evil or there was chaos. I shouldn't say evil, you know, let's say there was chaotic phenomena happening and people were like, yo, this phenomena is chaotic and way beyond me. What can I do? Let me call an order. You see? So it had a position in somehow shielding the human psychology from the chaos of the void, right? Just the notion that there's a creator. That means it's like, all right, so I'm not the main part of this world, because then you would feel it when you die, like the solipsist, when the solipsist dies, so does the universe, right? So religion, for example, has a sort of, you can say, soothing psychological effect. But when we wonder about 8 billion creatures on a rock and how their behaviors and how there's overpopulation also, like our population is increasing and our technologies are increasing. So we're pretty much like being a bunch of creatures that are increasing their numbers and increasing the intensity of their technologies. And you know what it is, guys? Let me tell you what I was doing in my youth. Like when I was saying those 7 names of God out loud, every time I would say it, I was projecting it in my mind. That means if I say the word apple right now, even though I'm saying it to the audience, but I'm hearing it myself as well. You know? 8 billion people on the planet, you know, and we can't be so selfish in the inner realms that one ideological system is going to rule every ideological system. You know, it's as if God didn't create the universe so it could clone it at the end. You know, cloning means everything looks like the same, right? And right now, the religious ideology, I'm not a person who, I would say I don't have too much of an, even though I've experienced both secular society and religious society. I've had that privilege in this lifetime. I will tell you, it's not a big deal. At the end of the day, human beings need to tell themselves something, right? Now, if it's a story, multiple people are agreeing, you'll be like, yeah, it looks like truth, you know? That means imagine you woke up in a universe one day, imagine just a complete hypothetical situation. You woke up on a universe one day and you went outside and everybody on the planet was believing the whole universe is shaped like an iced tea glass. Like a glass of iced tea. The whole universe is a cup of iced tea, to a point where, cup of iced tea is like popular everywhere, everybody knows, right? You would be like, yo, what if the universe is not a cup of iced tea, you know? So you see, it's as if even through the theological lens, this is where I'm going to get into the core of the talk here. Through the theological lens, everything is God's creation. Even one's enemy is God's creation. That means I don't understand how, in some sense, the religious mentality can preach love of God at the same time hurt God's creation. You know, there's a paradox there. There's a existential confusion there. You know. So, the moment we realize that which moves the moment is beyond language, because before language there was a viewer, it's as if everything is God's creation, there is no such thing as man. That means if in a religious, true religion means only God is in the room. Because what else can the human being do? You know, through the religious mentality, the religious ideological system is so uniquely structured. You know, that means even though the concept of a revelation is a bold claim, but at the same time, the literary content, it's as if, like, do you know, it's as if you read a book from like, who wrote this, you know? To me, you know what what sometimes I feel, and I'm saying this, of course, playfully and creatively, I feel if we made a time machine, and the first mistake somebody made with a time machine, where they went back in time and they accidentally dropped a book. Imagine right now someone from 2021 goes into the 6th century and throws a bunch of books, you know, and then comes back to 2021, right? That's an incredible theory, you know? But if especially the future self of the species is a collective being, it's as if God is the ultimate subject, and when we are all God, it's as if we are going, it's as if through the theological lens, we are going from individual objecthood to collective subjecthood. How fascinating is that? You know, literally the individual right now, people, that's a phase. That word is a phase of nature. You see, the truth, if it's a concept, which is impossible for truth to be a concept, actually. It's as if every moment of existence is made from two dimensions. One dimension, it is the observer or the creator, and then there's one dimension which is the observed, the created, right? And the thing is about creation is that we are the effect of Adam's mistake in theology and Abrahamic religion. What that means is man, our ancestors made a mistake and the whole, lineage had to suffer, imagine. That's pretty much the religious story, And of course, it is very unwise to compare a 6th century creative work with the cultural normality of 2021. I'm not trying to be a person, because it's too easy to judge something negatively. It's just too easy. Anything, it can be broken. It's like it takes a long time to build a house of cards, but then instantly it can be broken. And sometimes when I look at nature, it's an effort ultimately. That means even if you consider it as a human effort or a dehumanized effort, it is a movement. It is something that is moving. It's as if its attention is in the room and it has realized that it can animate itself anywhere in the room. It's as if the mind and body are both being the world, but the mind can teleport to anywhere in the world, but the body can't. The body is in one position. This is why a person can close their eyes and have dreams of Venice, as a, how do I say it? It's like our psychologies are so fascinating that it's as if the brain is a sponge. The brain is a sponge where from the beginning of its life, it just receives. And then at the end of its life, or during its life, if it's smart, it's that you squeeze the sponge and whatever was contained is expressed outwards. It's released. What that means is it's kind of like our brain is a hotel, and ideas are, ideas are coming and staying there, for some time and leaving. But the hotel is not the idea that comes and goes. I sometimes think about theology in the sense that, all right, human beings could have made a leap. Like, it's very probable that the human being was like, where do I come from? And the human being was like, I come from people, right? And imagine the person was like, where does the universe come from? And the person's like, what if it comes from a person, right? So eventually, this is why Voltaire is the smartest atheist. All atheists should learn from Voltaire, because he understood the significance of ideological movement regardless of the experiential emotional truth you impose on it. Voltaire has this quote where he says, I don't remember the exact quote, but the imagery, like what he's saying in the quote is pretty much, if we didn't create the concept of God, if the concept of God didn't exist, eventually it would be created. We would have to create it. Why? Because literally it's the personification of the outer realms. That means we're like, all right, I'm a person. And then the person's like, all right, where am I? And when the person's wondering about where am I, if first it's a inanimate physical world, then in the religious in the religious conception, it is God's dream. At least I know that is very clearly stated in Vedic thought, which is a polytheistic tradition, of course. But in monotheistic thought, God's will means literally God's. We are being God's imagination. To be honest, religious people are being the imagination of a singular truth. They're being like, it's as if God is one point and every line is extended forth from it, from the theological lens. And I would say one advantage that religion has, that I would say that other ideological systems doesn't, it doesn't ignore the emotion. Because if we really look at modern society, the rational mind is not an emotional mind. Emotions are actually highly irrational. Even though we care for it, and there's so many psychologists, and people on the planet who they care for emotions. Emotions are like the main event of this life sometimes. But the type of intellect that we are training, like the way we're training the future generations, is that we're disconnecting their emotions from their observation or analysis of the geometry of the realm. Right? This is what really, I think, makes you, whoever you are, makes you a scholar, right? A scholar has a passion and love for how the idea stands on alone, regardless of how the person sees the idea. Most people's fascination with knowledge is they want to know something more to do something with it. Very few people want to explore what they know. Do you know, a lot of people know a lot of things, but how much they have explored who is knowing in the moment. You can say that we're either in this world to all be new, or we're all here to be the same. And this is really what the population is going to be divided into in the future, I perceive. Because think about what's going to happen. Right now, the ego is in the driver's seat. The ego is infused with animalistic instinct, which means fight or flight responses, and it also means that the ego has a sort of self-accumulation, right? That means it's like the only reason we have ideas is because we are in motion. Many people don't realize this. The reason language exists is because there is movement. If a person never moved, there would be no need for any language. It's as if nothing changed. Language is like a creature's reaction to change, Or a creature saw a changing world and was like, wait a minute, let me copy paste this and then manipulate it quicker than I make a decision in the outer realms and survive. Now, there is something in religion that I've noticed, and so maybe this is worthy of being discussed. First of all, there's a mentality where we think we're souls. And that's very difficult to talk about. And then there's a reality where we're just creatures, okay? Now, if the creature wants to perceive a soul, because the universe is empty, technically, it doesn't have visible content, the outer space. So it's kind of like an emptiness is surrounding everything that is human knowledge, an unknown emptiness. Because of that unknown emptiness, first of all, there is universal human rights, which means every human being on this planet is free to express their humanism. That means one thing has to be very crucial, realize, and this is what the shy people on the world don't understand. That means the biggest the one of the biggest universal declaration of human rights. So every human being has freedom of expression, and of course we have to realize this freedom of expression doesn't mean one person's freedom impinges on another's freedom. That means everybody's free, but we got to work together to kind of fit in this crowded room of civility, you know? By the way, anybody listening, feel free to ask questions, and treat your questions limitless. That means any question is welcome. You know, I noticed something very interesting. I noticed that human psychology has to express something to fully know that it can actualize. That means like a child has to take a step to know it's walking, you know. And so in let's say a rock in the middle of nowhere where there's 8 billion creatures, each the objects through evolution somehow have become a subject to themselves, then as a subject have considered the subject more important than the object and diverted from natural living. You see, I noticed something fascinating, that if you implement a method, it doesn't possess people. A method is something you can use. If you implement a story, it's as if that's where I would say the concepts of cults in culture come in, right? There's so many institutions right now, you know. There's, believe it or not, even modern religions, right? So it's literally so many different types of institutions that are just active, and each institution has a worldview and feels itself the superior, right? So I'm saying that there will inevitably be a Hunger Games of the institutionalization of the natural human, the unnatural institutionalization of the natural human, right? And Michel Foucault, this French philosopher, wrote a lot about power structures and the different types of power, you know. And there is a sort of power that can distract the attention of the species from its human nature, you know. And then there's a type of power that it's as if the system is built ignorant. Whatever you do, you lose in the system, you know. So reality is way more complex than, you know. So guys, my attention came to the chat section. Yeah, welcome guys, feel free to ask a question, and keep in mind I'm just some guy trying to share some ideas on a podcast, pretty much. Anyways, to keep going with this, at some point in evolution, when an object became a subject to itself, it began piloting more subjectively than objectively. I can tell you, for example, when I see, let's say, you know what it is? It's as if whether we see a person with their mind dressed in religious ideology, whether we see a person, their mind dressed in scientific ideology, you know, it's as if like ultimately it's just a wordless direct experience. That's really the core truth of life. It doesn't get more zen than realizing existence is aware it's existing. That's where the true silence finds you. Because if a person comes and says, hey guys, the world is just this story I'm telling you, you better believe it, you know, like it achieves nothing. It achieves nothing. what is achieved is the human mind's exploration of the questions that it formulates and the paths it takes to answer those questions. And we're going towards an era where the multidimensional human being is going to be walking. So what that means is that you know, guys, there was a man named Swami Krishnananda. He has said one of the most interesting quotes in theology, I would say. He says that religion is God remembering himself. There are truths that are indirect, they're in language, and there are truths that are direct and they are not in language, pretty much. With this distinction in mind, the human being cannot be one idea. Therefore, judgment is art. Judgment is art in the world. So in the chat section, guys, welcome everyone. Zen says, I only channel and say what I'm told to say. I swear to me, it's my duty. Yeah, you could totally, stop taking responsibility of maintaining your individualism and just be the universal, spontaneous expression. Like for 4.5 billion years, we have been an unconscious expression. It's only in the opportunity of language in this current time where we can have an ego, Most people feel the ego is an obstacle, but they don't realize the ego is just the idea of self you have in one moment, which is a room in the space-time continuum. There's a man named Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he had pretty much, you could say, something like a guru-disciple relationship. He had a disciple by the name of Henry. Oh my God, how do I forget this man's name? Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau. Yeah. So these two gentlemen. From Ralph Waldo Emerson in America, at some point, I don't remember the exact year, but at some point, there began something known as American Transcendentalism. And American Transcendentalism was this notion that pretty much Ralph Waldo Emerson went into nature, and he was a man who had a sort of Christian context to his life, and he went into nature and he had concluded that God, every man has a soul and the soul is God. Because he had that sort of ideological connection in his mind, when he went to nature, he was being, literally his whole moment of being was where God's will was happening. Do you see? So he was a person who said that a person's relationship with their own soul is like their relationship with the God that is I shouldn't say in the first person view mover, it is literally the whole sphere. There's a quote from Carl Jung, I gotta find this for people right now. Carl Jung, what's the quote? There we go. So evidently Carl Jung was sharing some wisdom about something that the alchemists would say. Just a second, guys, I'm looking for this. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Carl Jung says he says a saying of the alchemist is, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. So did you hear that, guys? I mean, of course you heard it, but like I'm saying, if one understands what Carl Jung was trying to say, he's saying God is a circle, so the whole universal intelligent event is like truth, okay? And then he's saying where everywhere, so where its center is everywhere, because the center is connected in where all the degrees are starting from. That's like the center of truth, right? Truth is in some sense the whole circle, but the center of it is God. And he says the circumference is nowhere. So nowhere is in some sense reverse engineering from an infinite value, I would say, to a dualistic value, to a singular value, then to the void. So what I mean by that is that we're divided between everywhere and nowhere, and human beings are using language as a means of trying to have a relationship with this world. If the world, let's say it's a coin flip, let's say there's a 50% chance the whole universe is intelligent and alive and can communicate, you know, and let's say there's a chance that the universe is just stuff. It's like atoms don't have personality. Sorry, you know. So and in my school of thought, and personally for me, it's a division between the known and the unknown. That means, sure, people can be like, all right, you know, this person is Mr. Within, but I'll tell you, like, to me, my eyes open, and when my eyes open, it's as if all that I have access to is a known range, as if my brain is a candle flame, and the glow it creates is the consciousness of the moment. And it's as if I notice the edges of this consciousness, you know. You can totally know how much of the moment the person is being, you know. We all can know instantly, actually. This is why they ask Kabir, how long does it take to get enlightened? And he's like, half of an instant, you know. That means it's instantaneous. So truth is instantaneous. Any moment you stop doing anything, you can say truth is being everything. Carl Jung has this quote. He says, but if we think that God were responsible for the original sin, there would be no more mystery about sin. Yeah, it's as if it's like from the theological lens. I believe there's a passage in the Islamic text where it says as if God doesn't need. I'm not stating this accurately, but I want to share a certain idea that's been communicated, that God doesn't need people to preach God. You know, it's as if it's like man has misbehaved in a transcendental landscape, and now has been put into a place where only through piety he can, in the garb of piety, he can elevate to the heavenly status, right? To a point where it's like the mistake wasn't made, right? So it's as if it's like, I don't want to say it's the world a prison or simulation idea, but I'll say it's kind of like, it's as if through religion, this physical dimension is like the judgment upon a multidimensional being. A transcendental being, a being that doesn't have just the dimension of a body that is temporary, but has something that is connected to the truth. That's what pretty much the religious ideology is. You know, God is everywhere because it's everything. You know? And so the only way I can think of that kind of can be like somehow understood is like if a person had a dream, and in the dream they were a person, and they were like in their, let's say you have a dream, and in your dream you run underwater, and you can somehow run underwater in your dream. You wake up and you realize you were not just the character in the dream, your mind was being the whole dream. Even though you were sleeping in the bed, you were the whole inner realms as attention. It's as if this whole thing in these like, you know, long series of talks I'm giving, the whole thing I'm saying is as if like we are this attention, and this attention has in some sense like a reality that is in front of it and a reality that is behind it. Strangely, our body is from the world. Our mind, as legend would say, man is the child of Mother Earth and Father Sky. Our mind is not, I don't want to say the human consciousness is not natural, but it's like I can't say it's unnatural and I can't say it's natural. You know, the human consciousness is, it's as if it's like you notice the film projector, but you can't deny the film, you know? You know, guys, I want to explain something which I think is important to human psychology. When I speak about the inner realms and outer realms, I am that person suggesting we're living two lives. Now, just take this in that you have an inner life and an outer life. Now, the inner life has a truth, and the outer life has a truth, imagine. Okay? So you have the option of in some sense, your inner world defining the outer world. This is pretty much on the edge of, like, you know, you can become a dictator that way too much if you know, it's kind of like we have to use our free will, but if we use it too intensely, it has consequences also. So humility is also important, but the thing about human psychology that's important is that if you want the world to fit okay, how do I say it? The inner self has a view and the outer self has a view, okay? Now the inner self, just entertain this idea, guys. The inner self has a worldview in the sense of, imagine an angry person who is angry at the wrong person, but they believe that person is to blame. You know, as if imagine unjustified anger. The person is in the blind rage, just locked in their inner realms. It's like a person who their mind has possessed, an idea in their mind has possessed them. You know, so it's very important to recognize that. You know, that there's two worlds, right? So the religious attitude is like, I don't want to change my inner realms. The outer realms have to follow this inner realm strategy, right? And the outer realms are like, no, the outer realms have freedom, the inner realm has to follow. So all of human conflict, at least in regards to 8 billion spheres of psychology, you know, colliding or engaging. So the challenge is that we have to have an ability not to get convinced only by the world we see, but also have an ability to put whatever our belief is, like on a table, like an object, and look at it from different angles, you know? That is in some sense the meaning of true divine love. You know, you loved your world so much that you care to see all its dimensions, not just one dimension, right? And so this is the thing where before the religious Hunger Games becomes like very intense in the future, we have to already have the multidimensional advanced communicator archetype in society. That means there's not going to be any more belief or disbelief wars. Language is an Iron Man suit. If you stay in it too long, you think you're the Iron Man suit. The nature of the mind is dynamic. We are treating truth like a noun and we're fighting over it. He is ushered into a true inner freedom. That means if we are truly considering a human being to be free, that means that human being's eyes have to have an ability to move, right? It's as if, imagine somebody sitting on a chair and they're never getting up this chair, and then the person's like, yeah, I know I'm free, but I don't want to get up from this chair. It's as if they know they are free, but they don't use the freedom of getting up. They are free, but they don't use the freedom of getting up from that chair and exploring more of the room, This may be an intense way of saying it, but when I go for walks, I look at people and I'm like, no way. It's as if biological engines, motivated through their inner perception. That means we are literally such an intelligent event in nature. It's remarkable, and it's kind of like we don't know anything. That's why I'm always inspired to give these talks, It's as if the person's how some people, they identify, for example, with the introvert archetype, and they can't be around people too long. It's as if a person can live behind their eyes more than they live in front of their eyes, and they can live in front of their eyes more than they live behind their eyes. And I'm telling you, if we truly live okay guys, I think maybe I'll pay attention to the chat section a little bit. So pretty much just to take it to a checkpoint. An object became a subject. The subject is moving the object. The past makes us think the subject doesn't have freedom to change. The future tells us that it has freedom to change. We're human beings that we have been so bad at managing our own past that with the present, in some sense, we've taken even ceremonial attitudes to it. There's the concept of redemption even, It's as if, the first person we know is ourselves, truly. Then the rest of the world is our hypothesis, It's because there's so many unknown variables. That means Terence McKenna has this saying. He says, nobody knows enough to worry. You know what that means? That means whatever amount we know, it will never be enough. Kind of like Salvador Dali says, do not fear perfection, you'll never reach it, To be at peace, but to also discover the peace in the world, That means who knew world peace has to be an internal discovery of the transformation of an idea-shackled character into a direct experiential human archetype. That means, what I'm doing, guys? I'm kind of like that person in history who I would say is commanding. It's like, imagine their language wars are going on. That's a battlefield, and I've come into this battlefield, and I'm saying the human idea is more important than any idea. That means that it's as if I am pushing back the possession of language, of nature. That's kind of the angle I'm trying to show. I don't know how well I communicate that, but our human life, there's a poet called Rumi. He says, before death takes away all that is given, give away all there is to give. That means this life is it's an opportunity of expressionism, and the freedom of that expressionism is like, do we want, like, imagine, your ancestors suddenly, like, somehow coming back to life and being like, no way, people are still behaving like us. They'll be horrified if our ancestors found out that we're behaving like them, because everybody lives for a future that is more able. There is something I want to share with the audience. I would say this may go into a sort of subcategory of Sufism and its relationship with theology. There was a man by the name of Hazrat Inayat Khan. He was alive. What year is this? From 1882 to 1927. And this man brought forth this sort of idea called universal Sufism, and I want to share with you its foundational principles, right? Because pretty much what it is that this person has taken an attempt to categorize the various dimensions in reality, right? Pretty much every person's attempt at intelligence is that. So, and of course, Sufism is the mystical. It's not. You can't say it's purely religious, because it is using the free will upon the invisible. That means it's pretty much like a curiosity that wants to see beyond the senses, infused with a sort of past religious context of the mythos. But anyways, so it says in Ayat Khan set forth 10 principles that formed the foundational principles of his universal Sufism. His first principle, he says, there is one God, the eternal, the only being, none exists save he. 2, he says, there is one master, the guiding spirit of all souls that constantly leads all followers toward the light. There is only one holy book, the sacred manuscript of nature, the only scripture that can enlighten the reader. There is one religion, unswerving progress in the right direction toward the ideal which fulfills everyone's soul's life purpose. There is one law, the law of reciprocity, which can be observed by a selfless conscience, together with a sense of awakened justice. The 6th one is, he says, there's one brotherhood, the human brotherhood which unites the children of earth indiscriminately in the fatherhood of God. This was later adapted by followers to say there is one family, the human family, which unites the children of earth indiscriminately in the parenthood of God. Yeah, so he was really taking the idea of religion into the future, where it's as if all human beings are like divine if the world is, you know what I mean? I'll go on to the 7th. He says there's one moral, the love which springs from self-denial and blooms in deeds of beneficence. And then there's a later alternative of that where he says which springs forth from a willing heart, surrendered in service to God, Allah, and humanity, and which blooms in deeds of beneficence. Alright, and he says there is one object of praise, the beauty which uplifts the heart of its worshipper through all aspects from the seen to the unseen. There is one truth, true knowledge of our being, within and without, which is the essence of wisdom. And then he says there is one path, annihilation of the false ego in the real, the effacement of the limited self in the unlimited, which raises the mortal to immortality, in which resides all perfection. So pretty much you know what it is? All ideological systems find themselves in a world with a spectrum, a hierarchy of different ways of looking at things. And pretty much in this guy's universal Sufism, all of these are the behaviors of a universal being. It doesn't matter. It's as if you become a universal, you consider yourself, like, even though we say human beings, but it's like we went from, let's say, I don't know, just to be poetic about it, we went from the Homo sapien to the human universal, you know, or something like that, you know, where the idea is that once we experienced our humanism in the context of our culture, in the context of our nation, in the context of our globe, our planet, in the context of our galaxy, you see, eventually it goes to the universal. Like, what does it mean to be a human being in the universe? Not what does it mean to be a human being on Earth, not what does it mean to be a human being in a certain colored part of the Earth, you know? Like, what I mean is that pretty much the planet is a sphere, and we've taken paintbrushes and we've colored nations on a sphere. It's literally just human beings on a rock. I mean, you know, if when we forget that simple truth, war begins, you know? So the reason I shared this is because, in some sense, I wanted to say that religion was an attempt at the ultimate, right? We can't ignore that, right? Regardless of how much religious people have been cruel in the past, like the Spanish Inquisition, you know. Regardless of whatever, it's as if, like, the moment human beings realize they're not an idea is the moment the world will have experienced a first instance of peace. And that's where compassion comes, right? If compassion can't come from too much the inner realms, right? Let me tell you why. Because it's not sensitive to life. In the inner realms, the mind is behaving like an immortal god. Only in front of the eyes, the body is temporary, and we care for, like, the subtle shifts in reality. So guys, I shared the universal Sufism with you because it is pretty much it is an attempt at it's a creative attempt at a creative model of, you know, reality. I mean, to be honest, like, here's the thing where, you know, sometimes I wonder if my voice deserves to step out in the outer realms, you know. But you know what it is? It's as if we're here for a little while, and the answer and the question is, what do we do though, right? And so if we choose to hold the notion of time, we will go into character, storyhood, simulationism, let's say, you know. Imagine those people in the future who believe in simulation theory. They'll be known as the simulatists, you know. Everything is just a simulation. Nature's truth is beyond language. Language is like creating nature in, like, another inner dimension. For me, in one of my science fiction works called The Messenger of Giants, it's unpublished at the moment, but it's coming soon. In this, I had a very unique concept where I thought about the year 5025, and I thought about what that reality would look like. And in some sense, I saw in my inner realms, and I pretty much based my science fiction from this, like, inner cinematic experience I had. And pretty much what it is I saw that in the future there will eventually be an artist that will become a politician, a leader of a nation. And people are going to be like, is the artist qualified? But somehow the way the universe is going to work is an artist is going to become a politician. Now, in all the serious political affairs that has been going on in current politics, we see this artist go into like the United Nations and declare that it's the first nation. It's the first nation that is declaring it's spending all its funds on trying to just make the most beautiful nation. And everybody in, all the politicians in the UN are like, oh my God, preposterous, beauty in a political discussion, and so I had envisioned this reality where as one nation begins to make the most incredible streets, quality of everything just is becoming incredible because we're here once, like travelers and materials in a material elemental realm. And so imagine all the nations begin competing not in military budget, but in creative vision of how incredible, how advanced humanity can go forth, right? Imagine literally like all the knights of the round table in King Arthur, where they all saluted to King Arthur. It's literally going to be where the idea of an advanced human civilization is going to be like King Arthur, and all the nations through their creative vision of what is the most incredible thing we can create, rather than, oh my God, who's competing with us, like that. That's why in some sense I would say capitalism hasn't even experienced its greatest evolution. A capitalistic system that cares not for the morality of humanity. That means we don't care about really the quality of products that are entering the world. It's like that's a sign of a civilization that has given up on itself. It's as if people shouldn't be too startled if they find themselves in a depressed state of mind. Let me tell you why. Because the world is in a depressing state, and our minds are way ahead of our bodies. The outer realms, it is behind. That means so many things I see, I'm like, why isn't that technology here, but why can I visualize it? And that literally means not enough people are caring for the inner evolution of this human being, as if it was a creature that was silently roaming the earth. Then it began speaking. And the mind is a privilege. It's literally like your sword and shield in an unknown universe. Observation is like it shields you because you access more information and then make decisions. And expressionism and communication is like you use your sword to cut the veil of the unknown. So if you are a religious person listening, appreciate the language, but wonder about the direct experience of truth. That is the greatest clue, and that is the true connection of the creation with the creator. It's an instant, the connection. It's not do this, do that, jump through these loops, these hula hoops like a dolphin, and then you'll go to heaven. It's like there's something way more there, a human dimension, a dimension where if you are truly God's creation, begin appreciating your existence. Its design, its mirror, and how much unknown it is, right? Because the type of society we've built, at least in Western civilization, is one that is considering it knows before it wonders it doesn't. That means the biggest thing is that the ego lacks the humility to realize the unknown is greater than the known. So this is why faith is important in a changing world. But faith doesn't have to be ideologically possessed, right? That means it's as if a command, imagine in the future, there is a command given by an enlightened society to the whole planet. And this command is in some sense all ideological systems and institutions have to immediately disconnect from humanism. And what I mean by this, that means there is no longer religious people or philosophical people or scientific people. There is angles of looking at the world, but we're just people. We're just natural human beings, just a biological creature. If we lose sight of the natural gracefulness of our biological existence, it's as if the future's just gonna be a bunch of robots acting human. It's gonna be an artificial heaven. We have to avoid the artificial, and that's when the roars of a direct experiential truth. This is why I went like the archetype of the mystic fascinated me. The mystic is the only archetype in humanity. It's the only type of person who was like, okay, I've seen the known, now what is the direct experience of the ultimate moment of being? Just like in Lord of the Rings, everybody was trying to find that ultimate ring. It's as if like in mystics where people were like, what is the ultimate? What is the completion? That means if it's a simulation, what is the end? And seldom do they say this, it's before the beginning. That means some people need to get enlightened, and some people, they were born in an enlightened universe. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like when the world is enlightened, truth's realization can only be left. It's as if the person was like, man, I spent my whole life trying to build an advanced civilization, you know, and then, but at the same time, consciousness is everywhere. Oh well. Do you know what I mean? I'm saying like, literally a person can live any kind of life, and existence is existing. It's like the dimensions of being are being. That's true. When we are aware that we're being, that's where we get our truth from. And when we do things, this is literally moment hopping, which means it means behind our eyes there's a speed to how phenomena moves in your inner eyes. I am saying we lived through an era of object worship, been there, done that. We've lived through an era of subject worship, and this has been going on too far. Now it's just the multidimensional experience is the only other option. I don't see what else can a creature do that is experienced objects and subjects, right? Probably the most advanced use of them. And after the most advanced use, it's as if the person lived the life as far as it could. Do you see? This is why I'm saying, whoever you are, this is my kind of strategy of universal humility. This is how I keep myself humble in reality. I realize in any moment, there was a saying from a religious context where it says, any moment God can take your breath away, you know? And so I would tell you that if symbolism is truth is an experience, and those who have experienced it know, that's it. And language is like, how much can you talk about skydiving? It's like you can only dive into the sky, right? And the world is an unknown sky, and we're a known part of it, and we are in some sense not even a skydiver. We are pilots. Your free will, every moment, every human being is piloting their attention. And when you realize how you pilot your attention creates your attitude, you'll laugh at how language is like thin ice. The moment you look at its source, it breaks. There was a man by the name of Sri Ramana Maharshi in India, and he was considered as this very enlightened sage. And he says that the ego, or when a person asks the question, who am I? That question, which there's an ego asking it, is literally like the ego is a stick, and imagine you're making a fire, like a campfire, and you use that stick to move all the other sticks and in the proper positions, and eventually you throw that stick, as if the ego is here for us to attend to the mortal matters of our karma. Do you know? But eventually the person has to just eject from the idea that they are an idea, because life is going in towards an unknown experience. You know, that means it's as if we have a society where everybody wants to be certain all the time, but the end destination of the biological life is the unknown. You know, the unknown is like, I don't know how to say it, like the unknown is unknown, you know. I can't even say, you know. I feel when we wonder about how an idea is, even how ideas came about, it's because we wanted it to we wanted to hold on to moments after they had happened. Like, that's the genius of the design of human memory. And really, when I was younger, I thought my mind and my memories was like a file cabinet. That was such a childish way. You know, the memory is literally how the attention in the room acknowledges the world. It's a context shift. People don't realize this. Memory is a field you find your attention in, and you can shift through this. And it's not that the person has, you know, it's not like the persona is like the body. The mind is not an object, so it can't be treated as, you know, and the ego is how we treated the mind like an object. And we built a civilization around it. That's why civilization 1.0 is waiting for its own salvation. I feel that a human dimension of experience and acceptance globally has to be attained. That means like pretty much all parents and all teachers have to be like, all right, we got to start teaching this. That the human being is a being that is between the unknown and the known, so nobody can ever be judged because we never see who they are from their eyes, so we never know who we're judging. Right? When it comes to psychology of beyond the physiology. Guys, I'm going to go into a quote tunnel actually before I end off the episode. Before I end off the episode, I'm going to go into this quote tunnel. Where is it? From Carl Jung. And Carl Jung is a very important human being. He's this Swiss psychologist, if I remember correctly. Carl Jung says the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung says, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung says we should not pretend to understand the world only by intellect. The judgment of the intellect is only part of the truth. Carl Jung says that which you most need will be found where you least want to look. Yeah, this is why those people who randomly come across these live streams, you know, they might actually be, you know, this quote has meaning. Carl Jung says, show me a sane man and I will cure him for you. That means the unknown is so beyond our knowledge that our sanity can only be defined by the domain or the sphere of awareness of our knowledge. And that's limited. That's believe it or not, as even Ludwig Wittgenstein says, this German philosopher, he says, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Carl Jung says, the teacher pretended that algebra was a perfectly natural affair to be taken for granted, whereas I didn't even know what numbers were. Mathematics classes became sheer terror. and torture to me. I was so intimidated by my incomprehension that I did not dare to ask any questions. Yeah, pretty much he had a bad teacher, you know. That means, you know, mathematicians missed out when they, you know, were rude to Carl Jung, you know. Carl Jung says, there is no birth of consciousness without pain. I wouldn't say pain, I would say with just information. Like, pain is like another dimension of information, right? It's like something that is being added to the moment or arising in the moment. And you can say love is also something that is arising in the moment or being added to the moment. Carl Jung says the capacity for directed thinking I call intellect. The capacity for passive or undirected thinking I call intellectual intuition. Carl Jung says, wait a minute, I read that. He says everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. You see, guys, there is no good and bad. That's a choice of judgment. That's a choice of value proposition. You know, we have to realize the mind is overlaying models of the world over the actual physical world. That's what imagination is, and everybody uses imagination in problem solving, and problem solving is survival. So we cannot ignore the role of creative expression and then the outlets of creative expression. Right now, if you're a religious person, your creative expression is probably like pushed back, and it's very, very strange to say, because, you know, if you see creativity as duality, then you think it's a sign from the devil. But if you see creativity through unity, you think it's a sign from the divine. If you see creativity from the void, you think it's a miracle, you know. If you see it from the infinite, creativity from the infinite, it is God's greatest gift to man. It is as if, in the Islamic sense at least, it's called aql. Aql means it means intellect, but I would say intelligence. Forget intellect. That means anybody who is looking down or up at themselves only in one manner. I'm telling you, there's never been good or bad or stupid or smart people. There has just been creatures that have opened their eyes and they have looked at the world and they have responded to it in different ways. And so if we can organize a global response, you know, where we project that in, like, all right, in 600 years we'll have sky cities, in 3,600 years we'll have AI that is pretty much, what do you call it, more than 3,600 years, but we will have AI pretty much going in making advanced civilizations on potential inhabitable planets, and the purpose of life, probably, I'm projecting just as an estimate, 4,000 years from now will be only to have sex everywhere in the universe. There will be no greater philosophy at that point. The moment we overcome all our physiological suffering, that means imagine robots were doing everything, and every human being on the planet was fed and had clean water and temperature and an opportunity to live as a mind on this earth, right? We would be at a point where literally creativity would become the only thing that robots can do. And so novelty becomes like the god of the future, that which surpasses image, the new. It's literally, to me, this is the creativity, you know. It is neither, you know, from a judgmental standpoint of a theological beyond creativity. I will tell you, creativity is literally as if like an army of angels, poetically, each angel one by one arriving. You know, that's the power of a new idea in a society defined by the past. You know, It's as if novelty is truth in is truth's actual revelation in an experience. So we have to wonder beyond what we are, and I pretty much, and you could say like all my Mr. Within's whole philosophy, or what I say in these talks, comes down to this. I say that for the outer realms, the purpose of life is to build an advanced civilization. I've thought about this in so many angles, and I'm open for anyone to challenge me on this, but for me, in the outer realms, the purpose of life is to advance civilization beyond the language threshold. Then in the inner life, behind our eyes, the purpose of life is to advance communication, which I have made synonymous with the idea of wanting to find truth in the moment, which means the ultimate search. So what that means is moksha, enlightenment. I have made advanced communication enlightenment as to keep all the wisdom traditions alive as we move into the future. So I'm telling you, behind your eyes, advancing communication is the most incredible thing you can do, and you advance communication through expressionism, right? For example, a pious religious person is repeating the same behavior every day, so they're getting defined by the same actions, right? But let's say a person who does something new every day, then their psychology doesn't get stuck in ideological engagement. So we want advanced free human beings, and because we're here once, we want to literally have the greatest performance of humanism before extinction. And extinction is a probability, and I personally, in my work, I've developed this concept called Civilization 2.0, where I have found a strategy to bypass extinction, but we have to live towards that, or we either get swallowed by our oceans, or it becomes so crowded that it's as if the building collapses. That's a sort of inner extinction, where human beings can't manage themselves in the individual dimension and can't manage being a human being in the collective dimension, right? And right now in 2021 in society, it's completely void of honor, a global honor, a universal honor, as if you are the eyes that have opened to the universe now. Today, guys, I was just walking outside, and for a moment it was as if like time stopped, and I'm like, wow, I'm in a world right now. It was like there was an instant moment, I could tell you, where for me the divine was just known. It was as if the unconditional. Any unconditional state of mind is most likely by people being cherished as the divine. But I'm telling you, true freedom means that the world could never not be free. That our greatest opportunities take the same amount of energy. Literally, like if a person wants to feel they're bad, like that takes the same energy as feeling you're good. What I mean by that is it's like your attention is on a geometry of thought, And so we have to care for the human design and the legacy, and its mark in the cosmos, because the whole thing is, why there's a sort of judgment of man with God? Let me tell you why. Because the moment human beings had an ability to access language, it was for the first time our memories made one part of an evolutionary process more important. So we have actually been avoiding our evolution by living outside of nature. We could have totally biologically been looking differently if the ape had never stood on its from 4 limbs to 2 limbs. So there is something that it's as if like matter has awakened to itself. And so Mr. Within is saying the work of the realm is not ideological warfare. I mean, we got to realize there's going to be endless types of there's going to be so many human beings on this planet, and they're all going to have different views, different DNAs, which means even if 2 people had the same view, it would never be the same view. So we're all in this giant realm where endless code, like a matrix screen of various patterns of ideology, thought, potentials, and probabilities of the outer realm are being activated. access. Like, I don't know how, I don't know how to say it, but I'm trying to say, like, ladies and gentlemen, we are not our thoughts. There's never been a thought. There is a witness. There's a presence of how existence and attention are being simultaneous in a moment. And that's the watcher, right? So there's a watcher within. And that watcher within, when you realize it is the unconditional, this doesn't mean the outer realms is obliged to behave in accordance to the inner realms. It means the person has realized the inner realms could have nothing to do with the outer realms. You free yourself from the outer realms by noticing the inner realms as not the outer realms. Victor Pinchuk says art, freedom, and creativity will change society faster than politics. And art, freedom, creativity are three qualities that every explorer has. So if we somehow make the human being interested to truly understand what it is, that means fear is not going to stop till the end of time. People are going to fear something, but if we replace fear with understanding, it wouldn't just be fear. And we have to care for an incredible level of multidimensional complexity that may arise. We have, Ray Kurzweil is this futurist. He predicts that there's going to be a technological singularity in the year 2050 or something. And a technological singularity means man has created a technological phenomenon that is updating faster than we can control it, which means it is artificially more intelligent than us, So before we get to that point, which potentially there's going to be a strange technological revolution, like an explosion in the future in 2050, I am suggesting we advance the inner realms, because what is a technology? A technology is like, there's let's say the physical dimension to it, but then a technology is how the user of the technology moves the technology. Right now, humanity is the user of the technology of language. We're user of the technology of, for example, vehicles and whatever, I would like to, honestly, end the episode with this final remark. The world is way more unknown than it is known. We should be playful with our knowledge. We should be playful with our ignorance. We should never be brutal with our ignorance. And all human beings, I want you to imagine the earth being a giant concert. What do you call it? Imagine an orchestra, okay? And these musicians are just holding their instruments and they're not playing it. And there's literally 8 billion musicians holding unique instruments, their unique perception of through their DNA. And the future is literally gonna be where every musician starts playing the song of their life. And the song of their life is not something to change the world. It is as if it is an offering to not a God, but to how our intelligence can help make the lives of the future generations easier. Beyond language. Truth could never not be free. The era of the advanced humanity has come. Rise, mankind, rise.